Alrighty, happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Business Strategy Roundtable. Today, we're going to be talking about cyber insurance, and we're joined by Will Brooks, MSP Channel Chief and cyber insurance evangelist. So we're excited to get your expertise here and learn from you today. Thanks for being here, Will. How are you?
Dude, I'm doing good. I feel really calm after that intro music. That was just like gets you. You're just like, you know what? Any nerves I had coming onto a podcast, they're just gone. I feel
I
very
feel
calm.
I feel the same way. And then I have to figure out how to talk afterwards, and I'm like immediately
Like
right
taking a
back.
nap over in the corner. You're like, oh shoot, I gotta get over there and make the video.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm
Yeah, it's a
excited
pleasure.
to get to the strategy part of the conversation, how MSPs can be informed and prepared to deal with cyber insurance, and how MSPs can help them along and use cyber insurance as a differentiator. But before we get into that, I kind of want to highlight how you got to be an expert in MSP things and in cyber insurance. So if we could start by learning a little bit about your journey, that would be fantastic. And feel free to start
Yeah,
wherever's
dude.
good for you.
Yeah, dude. My journey is. Uh, I think the thing I'd start with when I share this with anybody is that my journey started in a way that you would never have thought I'd be working in an insurance field or in a cybersecurity field. Like it's the kind of thing where um as I've grown up, as I've gotten older, as I went through college, I majored in mathematics. I minored in computer science, but I was always a techie math kind of nerdy brained logic brained guy, right? But at the same time, I'm also very personable. I love to engage with people, talk with people, connect with people, network. It's all stuff I'm kind of gifted in and love doing. So when I got to the end of my my college life, I graduated and then I worked as a resident director at my college for an additional year. So I was an RA, I was an RD for a year or 2 years, and then I graduated, became an area director, overseeing part of the freshman. Yes, David, I am a professional wrestler in disguise, but also I spent a good amount of time in like college life space and relationship development space, and then I went off to seminary, became a pastor, spent 3 years in seminary, spent a year in the Virgin Islands doing pastoral work, then moved back to Long Island where I live now, doing pastoral work for 2-3 years. Um, but my kind of hobbies and personal life kind of lived more in the cybersecurity space. I'm like a self-proclaimed privacy junkie. So like internet privacy was really important to me, locking down your IPs, using VPNs, all that fancy stuff, but then also um, making sure that people's networks were just secure, like my parents, and being at home, friends. Hey, using a secure router, like even basic stuff like that. Like I probably could have been a salesperson for a lot of these companies. Just, I should have been part of like affiliate programs or something. But anyway, when I
You
moved
kind
back
of
to Long
are
Island, yeah, I know. It's
now.
true. When I moved back to Long Island, it was very apparent that a pastor's salary can't really pay the bills here. It's expensive to live on Long Island. So I felt called here, was living here, um, was doing my ministry here, but I was like, I gotta make more money. So I walked down the street 2 blocks from my parents' house where I was living at the time into a local insurance agency, and I asked the owner. I said, "Hey man, I need a job." And he said, "So what do you know about insurance?" And I was like, "Well, I know you need it." That's all I said. That's all I knew. And he looked at me and he kind of thought about it. He says, "Well, insurance is all about taking risks. So I'm willing to take one. Let's kick it off." And he hired me. So I had to get my insurance license, and I worked in this local agency, and I was working alongside a bunch of brokers. Specifically, I was working in personal lines, so helping people with their auto insurance and home insurance and all that kind of stuff. Then eventually they moved me over to commercial lines, so I was starting to write business insurance policies, with local businesses in the area. Um, I didn't dislike insurance, but I was really only working that job to make ends meet so I could continue to do my ministry. So as my ministry grew and I was able to increase my income there because it became more full time as opposed to part time, I was able to kind of step away from the insurance world, and I had no intention of ever going back. Like I was just like, I don't. That wasn't my life. I didn't want to be an insurance salesman. I didn't want to be doing that kind of thing. So you have this person who has a history in insurance. So he's 2 years of experience selling insurance, understanding the traditional insurance world, and at the same time, self-proclaimed tech nerd. Like anytime
Yeah.
the internet went down in my house as a kid, my parents would blame me, even if I had nothing to do with it. That kind of stuff, right? So, cyber-minded insurance experience. That was kind of my life. But
Yeah.
that was never the trajectory of my life. Those are just two things I did. So I was doing my ministry, and then I met my wife, now wife. And when we got married, all of a sudden it was like, dude, not only does ministry not pay the bills to live on Long Island, but now I'm married. It definitely does not pay the bills to live on Long Island. So that's when I stepped away from formal ministry, and I
Mhm.
still preach. I'm still involved in my church. I'm still very engaged. I'm just not on the payroll, right?
Mhm.
And in a lot of ways, that probably helps the church. But in all honesty, like I still feel very much moved to be a part of that. But at the same time, it's like, okay, I need to support my family here because if I'm going to be doing the ministry stuff, I need to stay here. So I spent the I actually moved into a financial advising role and did the whole, like, you get your series 7 and you get your series 66, like all that stuff. um and so I spent 3 months of hardcore training to pass those exams, started doing the financial advising, did it for about a week and said, I hate this sucks, like this is not what I want to be doing now. Part of it was like pounding pavement, going business to business. I didn't actually hate that. The part that
Mhm.
I hated was the fact that I was saying to them, "Hey, you know what? You should invest your entire like business savings, your personal life savings with me, and I'll take care of you." When at the same time, I was like, "You know what? I don't really care about the markets." So I learned all this stuff about the markets, and when I was done learning about it, I was like, "This isn't interesting to me." So then you're talking to someone, and then you're talking to someone, and you're saying, "Hey, invest your life savings with me," but I don't really care. Like that's the
Yeah.
most disingenuous way to run business.
It's bad
It's
sales.
it's yeah, bad sales because 'cause you're selling something you don't care about. Not that I didn't believe in it. I do think for someone who's a high net worth person, having a financial advisor is probably a really helpful thing, but that financial advisor should ultimately be a market nerd. Like, they should be into that stuff, right? So
Yeah.
I hated it, and I was like, "I gotta get out of this," but I was like, "What the heck do I do? I don't know where to go, so I'm gonna have to do this until I find something." And a friend of mine, John Wicker, reached out to me and said, "Hey, man," it's actually my wife's my wife's best friend from college, her husband, so out in Pittsburgh. Um, so my wife went to school in Ohio. So he reached out to me and says, "Hey, my wife told me that your wife said you're looking for work. Well, I work for this company, Fifth Wall. We're looking for an account manager. Would you be interested?" So I was like, "Oh, maybe. Could you tell me a little more?" And he says, "Well, we're a cyber insurance company." I was like, "Oh, insurance, not again, man.
You
I
weren't
hate my
excited
life
about
already."
you weren't excited about cyber?
Well, I didn't know what it was.
Okay.
So when I was working in the insurance space, when that was in 2016,
Hmm.
and cyber insurance existed, but it wasn't really being like pushed or explored in the depth that it is now.
So all you
Like
heard was insurance. You didn't
I heard
think back
insurance.
to
I did
you
not hear
didn't think back.
cyber. I heard
Yeah.
insurance.
Yeah.
And the first thing I did with that was like, oh man, I don't know, but you know what? I've done that before, and I hate what I'm doing now, so I'm willing to have a conversation.
Yeah.
I sat down and talked to Reed Wellock, who's the president of the company, about it, and we had he had a really good conversation. He's one of those personalities that's really dynamic but genuine. It's not like he's trying to manipulate into something. It's like when you talk to him, you're like, dude, this guy has good energy. I would love to work with this guy.
Yeah.
Um, and a couple weeks go by, and I end up getting a job offer for the company. Now, in that time, my insurance license had lapsed, so I had to go retake my insurance exam. And now I'm looking at it. So I'm simultaneously restudying for my insurance exam and reading cyber policies. So I'm just like trying to absorb as much information about a cyber insurance policy as I can. So I'm in tandem studying cyber insurance policies and then studying the New York State insurance licensing requirements. And dude, when I sat down to take my licensing exam, 160 questions, no, 170 questions, 10 were like uh experimental questions. So but you don't know which ones those are. So they're ungraded.
Right.
And there was one out of 170 questions on cyber insurance. So one.
Really?
So you're like, the industry as a whole, at least this was 2022, I think, the industry as a whole was still not taking cyber insurance that seriously, to the point where it was like, not that they weren't taking it seriously, but it just, the insurance broker agent world still wasn't getting a lot on cyber insurance. Like even the state exams were barely touching on it. So
What do you think
I
was
was
the
looking at Fifth
reason for
Wall.
that? What do you think
Um,
was and probably is to some degree? Because I'm sure there's small
sure. I
subset
mean,
there.
I don't want to waste too much time on the history of cyber insurance, but I
Sure.
mean, 2016, 2017, um, cyber insurance was still fairly, I mean, cyber insurance has been around probably about 25 years, but 2016, 2017 is when it started to be taken a little seriously. But even then, there weren't there wasn't much of a barrier to entry. So like if you know Wes Spencer, he loves to say getting a cyber insurance policy was like watching Oprah. It would just be under your chair. Right? You could just get a policy under your chair. It was cheap. It was like $1,000 or less. You didn't have to have any security controls. You just needed to have a website, revenue numbers, prove that you had a physical address as a business, like things like that. So carriers weren't even really looking for a whole lot of data on your business when they um, would give you a policy. And
They were just
so,
selling it.
right, it was easy to sell, and but it also was so cheap that there wasn't a whole lot of commission involved. So
Mm.
agents were like, I guess I'll push this, but whatever. So Dan just said market demand, and we can circle back to that because then the pandemic happened. And when the pandemic happened, you had all these businesses go remote. And when all those businesses went remote, all these businesses that had no security because they didn't need it for a cyber policy got hit with cyber attacks. They experienced cyber events, and then they went to file claims, and the insurance carriers lost a ton of money because they had no barriers to entry for policies. They weren't taking on good risks, they were just taking on whatever risks. So when I took my exam in 2020, it was 2022. Yeah, it was kind of at the end of that chaos, not the end, but it was at the kind of cusp of the chaos of COVID times, and all these businesses were getting hit with ransomware attacks, but the market hadn't adjusted yet, and the carriers hadn't necessarily figured out what the plan of action was yet. Like they were still building their actuarial data. So if the carriers weren't there yet, the state exams definitely weren't there yet because those take even longer to follow suit, right? I mean, the carriers are going to try and adjust on the fly, but the carrier level is like, hey, we take in data and then we change our underwriting requirements on that data over the course of a year or whatever. But you have a state exam, it's like, okay, well, we have to test the questions and then we have to do this and we have to do this and there's a panel and there's all, it's a lot more red tape to get through to make any adjustments. So
Mm.
that's a partial reason why you probably didn't see a lot of questions about cyber insurance on the exam itself. But so yeah, I passed that exam, and now I'm working as an account manager at Fifth Wall on our agency channel. So at the time, Fifth Wall is still very much this way, but Fifth Wall got its start as a regional cyber insurance wholesaler for Pittsburgh, Western PA, Eastern Ohio, and the West Virginia area local agents, saying, "Hey, you know what? Cyber insurance is up and coming. It's going to be big. It's going to be a thing. Um, we're here to help you navigate it. We will be the person you go to for all your access and to help educate your clients on it." So we built this big network of agents in those areas, and my job was to come in, nurture those relationships, help them write business, all that good stuff. Um, when I got started doing that, at the same point that I came onto staff, um, Wilson Henry, who I don't know if you've met him or not, he was hired to spearhead our MSP channel, which was brand new, baby faced. Like, we didn't know what the heck we were doing. We were just like, there's something to this, because we see that carriers are getting hit hard. So they're going to start requiring cybersecurity, and MSPs are going to be a strategic partnership to build, because we can't implement cybersecurity, but carriers won't write insurance without it. So why don't we work alongside MSPs to make sure that their clients have the right security in place to become optimal risk to our carriers? So I saw this. So I'm over here in the agency channel, and I saw this MSP thing starting up, and the tech nerd in me was like, I want to be over there. Like, I love working with these insurance agents. I made some great relationships. I'm still connected with a lot of them, and I appreciate that. But the opportunity for like cybersecurity tech nerd stuff, saying, "Hey, that's where I want to be," and also
You'd
like,
had you had
yeah, go
that
ahead.
long-term interest in that already. It
My
was just
whole life, dude.
your core. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like one of my favorite hobbies since I was a kid was like taking things apart to figure out how they work and put them back together again. Like, starts with Legos and then turns into like, oh, I can like open up my Game Boy and repair the screen myself, like that kind of stuff, right? So it's like that that level of approach. So I basically told Reed, I was like, dude, I'm gonna keep doing what you hired me to do, but just know I wanna be part of this MSP team, because I see what it's all about. And I met Wes Spencer. He became a really good friend of mine. Dustin Bolander became a really good friend of mine. Like, these guys who helped spearhead the beginning of this movement at Fifth Wall. Um, I just made really good connections with, and I looked at Wes. Well, this was a while. This was later. So let me backtrack. So as time went on, I ended up going to IT Nation Secure, because one of our staff members who was supposed to go couldn't make it. So they were like, well, Will, you said you were interested in this. You should go. So I went, and I both closed my largest deal on the agency side at that conference, and was like, you know what? I really want to be part of this MSP team. So I was starting to gain traction on the agency side, closed a really big deal, but I was like, this is still not what I want to do. I want to be over here. Right. So I moved, I went to that conference. I think I made a good enough impression that they were like, well, you're going to eventually move to this team. Still need to do the agency stuff, but just know you're headed in that direction. And then over the course of that summer, I eventually migrated over to the MSP team, um, and was an account manager on the MSP channel. So I was working on nurturing new MSP relationships. Wilson, who I mentioned before, was really awesome, getting me on calls, being like, hey, dude, like, when you talk to an MSP about insurance, it's very different from talking to an agent about it. Agents have been doing this their whole life. MSPs are like, I'm afraid to even talk about this and touch this because I'm not licensed, but it's a pain in my rear right now, because MSPs were getting these new extremely complex cyber insurance applications, because now carriers were asking all about security and they didn't know what to do with it. So it's like nurturing this, learning to speak this whole other language. um, what I like to say now is, one of the things Fifth Wall does is we translate cyber insurance to cybersecurity, and we translate cybersecurity back to cyber insurance. So we want to help people understand how those two things speak to each other. And that's what I had to learn to do. So I became that translator. And over the course of that season, as I was building partnerships with MSPs and doing all this stuff, Wes Spencer was our channel chief, and he was doing stuff. He had a studio like this. I don't know if you've ever seen his videos. But he was very personable. He would speak at conferences, but he would also um, do videos, do podcasts, do webinars, all that educational stuff. But it was quality. And if you remember, I'm a pastor, so like me being able to take something I learn and teach it to others is something I very much love to do. And like when I'm studying the Bible and I have to convey that in a sermon on Sunday, like, dude, sometimes I have to really zero in because I figure out all this stuff like ancient language stuff, ancient regional context, all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, oh man, I want to share all of it. And they're like, well, focus on your one point, right? So it's kind of tangent, but I wanted to be able
I
to do
love it.
that. And then, yeah,
That makes me want to listen to your sermons, honestly.
there you go. So then I
I don't know if that's the right word. I think it is.
that's the right word.
Okay.
Yeah. 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 But so I looked at Wes and I was like, dude, I want to do what you do. Right. And he looked at me and he said, that's great. And he said the same thing Reed said to me when I said I wanted to be on the MSP side. He said, it's not what you were hired to do right now. So do what you were hired to do. And in your spare time, outside of work, start doing things to establish yourself as that other person. So that's when I became a memes as a service guy on LinkedIn and started just dropping cyber memes. And they were pretty lame at the time, classic like single image memes. And as I learned more, I started making them more complex and silly and fun. And but also always made the text of that post very much educational about cyber insurance. So it's like, here's Will's goofy side, here's the serious stuff you need to learn from the goofiness. Right. And those two things kind of established who I was. And then I got, we had our kid and I had to build this soundproof office. And I was like, finally making a studio. Let's make it cool. But it was all that's to say, I took 20 minutes just now to explain that this behind me and this persona that I've created and who I am, it's all pieces and the coming together of who I genuinely am as a person and just did not realize throughout my whole life. Like it was like, oh, I'm really into tech. Oh, I did this insurance stuff. Oh, there's little pieces and how all those little parts of our lives can come together to form you into what you're going to be today. And it's really awesome.
And I think the reason people are so drawn to you and your content and your personality in general is because of how authentic you are. And even your pastoring ministry, maybe, I don't know, forgive me.
Both work.
Okay. I mean, you're speaking in front of, it's not easy to get up and talk in front of a lot of people. It's not easy to get up and, like you said, here's this, I'm very educated on the Bible and I'm going to give what I've learned over the course of your life to these people and illustrate it in a way where they can digest and take that information and go with it. You've taken every element of yourself in and put it in a way that you're able to deliver it and your skills to people who need it. And I think it's tremendous. And I think it's a big, authenticity. I've talked about it on this show before. Authenticity really leads to success and it draws people to you because you can really enjoy what you're doing. So you get better at the memes, you make the good office, you go the extra, mile or whatever, because you actually are enjoying it. It's not like, oh, I can't wait to be done, and then people feel that and they're like, oh, this is genuine. This is actually, it's something you might've said even before the call. You were talking about somebody who has really good energy, and you might've said it on the call, but has really good energy, and you never feel like they're trying to sell you. They're just being genuine. And you have that energy, and it's because of, like you said, culminating everything into this.
Dude, I appreciate that. I mean, one of the reasons, honestly, is I actually do some posts about this every once in a while, is imposter syndrome, right? Like we all feel it, I think, in this industry. Because like ultimately I'm at heart, at least at this stage in my life, I am more of an insurance guy than I am a cybersecurity guy. Like I've learned a ton about cybersecurity, and most of that is either self-taught or taught by friends. Like I'm not taking official cybersecurity classes here, but I've learned a lot. But at the end of the day, like most of my knowledge base lives in the cyber insurance space. So that's where that kind of lives. But as a bringing back the whole thing as a pastor, there's this one passage in scripture in James's letter that effectively says like not everyone should be teachers because teachers are judged twice as hard as like a normal person. And like regardless of your view on the afterlife, whatever, I mean, from my perspective, right, that's scary stuff, dude. Like if I'm going to get up here and I'm going to share this information, I better do my due diligence to make sure I know what the heck I'm talking about. And I'm not just getting up there and spewing nonsense. And that's carried over into what I'm doing now is it's like, okay, I'm not going to necessarily be judged twice as harsh if I mess up and say something, but it's like, I'm getting up here, I'm in front of people, and I am trying to be my genuine self. And because I'm being my authentic, genuine self, most people are going to listen to what's being said. And if what's being said is wrong, then my authentic self is steering them in the wrong direction. And I'm not okay with that. So I want to make sure that what I'm sharing is legit.
Absolutely. I know we have a bunch of really good content to get to, and I want to ask you one last question about you,
Sure.
and then I will stay focused, and it's this. Other than your ability to communicate complex ideas and speak in front of people, talk a little bit about how your relationship with Christianity has impacted your the way you do business in the tech world or the insurance
Yeah,
world.
dude. So two things. My background in Christianity is what you would label as reformed, which effectively what that ultimately leads to is that God's hand is very involved in everything we do throughout our lives, right? It's not just me making a bunch of decisions and trying to figure. That's very much like, no, dude, he's guiding you and he's helping you and he's leading you through your life, right? So if that's the case, it goes back to what I said before, where it's like this tech nerdy stuff and this cyber insurance and this brief stint in insurance that I had that I never thought I'd circle back around to, and the personality that I have and the growth journey I've had in school and in seminary and just in life experience, even outside of ministry, of connecting with people and speaking to people and being present in front of people. Like I was a camp counselor for 5 years. Like there were all these random things that seem very random and almost seem very coincidental. And then you look at the role you're in and you're like, there's no way those things were coincidental. So that is a part of it. And then I would say the other component that really drives me is that, and this is interesting. And this isn't necessarily something that like I planned on, but when I was a kid, my dad told me about a friend of his who I don't remember all the details, but he basically was like he was a Mennonite, so out in Pennsylvania area, and his work ethic. One thing he did with his business was like always be fair and always be genuine. Like don't overcharge people for things that they don't need to be overcharged on. Um, do the extra legwork if you have to do the extra legwork, and don't overcharge. Like don't charge what you're worth, right? And understand who you are, understand what you're worth, and then also recognize that, hey, I'm in this to better people's lives. I'm not in this to become the wealthiest person on the planet. Do I want to make a good living? Yes, because I have a wife and a kid to take care of, hopefully more kids someday. But ultimately, the driver is that people are going to be safer because of this. People are going to um, be better off because of this, and there is the additional benefit of saying I'm taken care of because of this too, right? And it's almost this: what is your work ethic? What is your drive? And it's a lot more than just I'm in this to make money. Because dude, the financial advisor job, because I didn't care about the subject matter, it would have purely just been an I'm in this to make money kind of job. Whereas this, I care about it, and I have seen firsthand people's lives get really messed up because of it. I mean, again, church world, one of the largest populations in a lot of churches are elderly people.
Yep.
And I have been parts of churches where the quote unquote pastor sends out an email with a link in it to the entire church body because an email list leaked, right? And that could lead to some serious devastation because you have these people who have generously given to the church because they believe it's the right thing to do, and now some cyber criminal is trying to take advantage of that generosity and say, oh well, we need even more, and it's just it so there's this additional layer of like, I want to teach people to not be wounded by that kind of thing. So I hope that
I
answered
love
the question.
it. Absolutely does. It absolutely does. And it's tremendous. You're awesome. And I'm
Thanks, dude.
excited. Thank you. I'm excited to switch into the quote unquote strategy, I guess, of the day, which is where
Yeah.
do you even start with cyber insurance? And we're going to kind of hit it from two different directions. One, from the SMB side, and two, from the MSP side. And, feel free to start from either direction. But where do you start with cyber insurance if you're an SMB? Where do you start if you're an MSP?
Yeah. Um So let me start with the SMB level, but I guess the first thing I'll say is that, and I mentioned it before, but before 2020, cybersecurity and cyber insurance were their own worlds. They didn't interact. They really didn't. I mean, maybe there were some real minor basic security controls that a carrier was looking for to consider the risk good, but for the most part, you didn't need any of that stuff. So the two worlds didn't really collide. Um, but from the small business owner perspective, or just any business owner, honestly, um, I would say for the insurance space, right? The first thing you're going to want to do is if you think you have a cyber insurance policy, check to see if it's more than one page. Like, let's just start there. And the reason I say that is there are bundle policies out there, right? So if you're a small business owner, you might have what's called a business owner's policy or a BOP policy, and a lot of times they'll add cyber insurance onto that, and that should be the red flag for you. Anytime someone says, "Hey, do you want to add cyber to this?" That's immediately a tack on minimal coverage kind of thing. And the reason that's a problem, I know it can kind of seem like, "Oh, I have cyber coverage, I'm good now." But the reason that's a problem is when you look at the amount lost in the midst of a cyber incident, like when you really get into the numbers, and it's not just averages, right? It's not like, oh, well, the average ransomware attack. It's really the potential for loss, right? Because and you would know this, like the types of cyber attacks out there vary greatly. So you have like the popular one, like ransomware. Oh, a ransomware attack. Okay, my business is down for 14 to 16 days, so I don't have that business income. I'm gonna have to notify people because data was stolen. Like there's a lot of stuff that has to happen. All those things are coverages on a good cyber insurance policy. But a good cyber insurance policy also has additional things like, oh, a threat actor called HR and changed bank payroll information and they weren't checked, and now paychecks went out to this cyber criminal instead of my employees, and I lost that money. A good cyber policy is going to help you with something like that. That's called electronic funds transfer or e-theft or things like that. Invoice manipulation, right? Like, oh, a threat actor spoofed my email and sent an invoice over to one of my clients, and they paid it to the bad guy. And now not only am I not getting paid for something, but my client's out $10,000, right? Like it's something like that, coverage for things like that. So it's really important to understand that when you get one of those like tack on policies, it's usually very limited in what it's actually covering. So you want a comprehensive policy, not because all of those coverages are going to kick in during every incident, but because there are so many types of incidents out there that you want to make sure you're covered for the gamut, because all of them are common. There's not one that's more common than the others. There's a particular coverage called dependent network interruption, which basically says, hey, look, if one of your vendors goes down, like you're using a vendor to run your business and that vendor goes down so your business can't operate, there's coverage for that now, right? Like it's this kind of thing where your vendor undergoes a cyber attack and their system's down and now you can't do business. Your business is interrupted because of some third party issue, right? Like that's not something you're going to find on attack on policy.
I
You have
love
a
the
question?
point. Yes, I do have a question. I
Yeah, go
love the
for it,
point. Thank you for allowing me to interrupt.
please.
Um,
We've seen uh, cyber insurance carriers go from having those like everybody can get one to nobody can get one.
Yep.
And it sounds like to me, and I want you to tell me if I'm off base here or if I'm onto something, having specific policy towards specific outcomes is allowing the insurance carriers to underwrite and quantify or qualify risk more effectively.
Sure.
Uh,
Um, a lot of these things, yeah, a lot of these things were coverages for a long time. They've kind of added and adjusted and done different things. There's another coverage item called media liability, right? Like if somebody slanders someone's name, like there's all these different things. So then you look at all those different coverages and you say, wait, this particular coverage has more capacity to kick in. Like this type of loss is more likely to happen if these security controls aren't enabled, and therefore we're going to require those security controls to be
or for
enabled. They're
this
not going
type of
to
business.
right. They're not going to completely remove the potential for that type of attack, but it's going to lower that. insurance is organized gambling. Let's be real. Like, you're looking at a risk, you're saying, I'm willing to take on that risk, and I will pay out if that risk, or if something happens within the contract parameters, I will pay out that money. But the goal is to take in more money than you spend. Like, that's really how insurance, like an insurance carrier, makes money. Any business wants to take in more money than they spend. That's just all businesses. Insurance does it by saying, we want to take on risks that are less likely to have a loss so that we end up making more money than we have to pay out. That's what it is at the end of the day, right? So yeah, they have all these coverage items, but they're also, that's why the tack on policies are so easy to just add on, because they're not covering you for the gamut of stuff, because they're not requiring you to have all the security measures to even be eligible for that. So my first point for a business owner, hey, make sure your policy is more than one page. If it's only one page, or it's just kind of like bundled into your policy, you're going to want to look at getting a standalone cyber insurance policy. Now, in order to get that, you're going to need security controls in place that are going to align with what the carriers are looking for. You can't just go in there and say, oh, I want a policy, I'm going to check yes on all these things and submit my application and get it, because now you've what's called misrepresented your business. You may not have that security in place, and if you have an incident, the first thing that happens is that a forensics company is going to come in. They're going to look at what happened. They're going to determine that the attack happened through this particular avenue, and it happened because a security control wasn't enabled that you said you had enabled when you applied for this insurance policy. Guess what happens to your insurance payout? Gone. Right? Not going to happen. So that's a really important thing to take in mind, is take those applications seriously. And then what I would say then is align yourself with two people. Find yourself an insurance agent who understands cyber. So I know that a lot of us do insurance with people who are our buddies, right? It's like, oh, my best friend from childhood is an insurance agent now. I use him or her for all of my insurance needs. Like, that's just what I do, right? And then you go in there and you ask a question about cyber insurance, and I go, I don't really know much about it. It's like, well, that's a problem. So you know what? Keep using your friend for all things insurance related, except the cyber component, because cyber is so complex and so complicated, and it is set to outpace commercial property over the next decade in terms of both loss, but also in terms of premium, like how much money is spent on that type of coverage. I mean, think about it. Businesses are downsizing properties because of the whole work from home world that we live in, right? So that's bound to happen. But that means because you have that additional layer of risk working from home, having all these remote devices out there, you have more avenues for a potential attack to happen. So you need to align yourself with an agent who understands cyber insurance. And there are fortunately more and more of them emerging. When I first started at Fifth Wall, there really weren't many. Now, like, I'm on LinkedIn, there's like this whole network of agents who really only focus in on the cyber insurance space, and it's really good to see. So that's one thing. Align yourself with a cyber insurance, an agent who understands cyber insurance. You can keep using your broker friend for everything else, but if they're not going to take cyber seriously, do not take them seriously when they sell you cyber. I mean, it's that simple. You just can't. You can't risk that for your business, because guess what? Friends aren't your friends once tragedy strikes. Like, once an incident happens, that guy's not your friend anymore. It's just not going to work out. Your business is destroyed because you didn't have the right cyber coverage. You don't want that to ruin a relationship, right? The other thing is align yourself, and this is what'll get me over to the MSP side. Align yourself with a good managed service provider. Like, you need to have good cybersecurity, not just because cyber insurance says so, but because at the end of the day, again, the risk is too great for you not to be taking at least basic measures to protect your business from some kind of cyber attack. So those are things like enabling those like MFA codes, enabling those things that you have to punch in a 6-digit code before logging into all your different things. And I know it's a little inconvenient, but guess what? It's majorly helpful. That kind of stuff, having backups, having patching solutions, doing security awareness training in a good cadence that's actually teaching you things, not just once a year at some annual retreat, right? There needs to be some actual practices put into play here for you to prevent a cyber attack from even happening to your business in the first place. And honestly, it's like, that's like me trying to figure that out for myself or you trying as a business owner who's not really necessarily techie, right? Maybe you are, but maybe you're not. If you're not, You figuring that out for yourself would be like me going into a restaurant and being asked to be the chef, right? Hey, put the menu together, figure out all the pricing, everything you need, and make all this amazing food. I'm not a chef. So I wouldn't know where to start. So that's where a managed service provider comes in. They say, hey, look, I will align your security needs with your business and we're going to get you protected. And then this is the beauty where the MSP can start utilizing the insurance piece too, is insurance now has specific requirements that businesses need to adhere to in order to be deemed a good risk or an optimal risk. And one of the things a good MSP should be doing is focusing on cyber resilience. So saying, hey, I want to improve the cybersecurity maturity of my clients on a regular basis. I'm not going to be satisfied with just the bare minimum. I want them to understand, to grow, to continually meet emerging threats. Cyber threats change all the time. So I want to do everything I can to continually meet those emerging threats. So we're going to continue on a pathway towards upgraded security as time goes on. And the way you can utilize what insurance is looking at to help you kind of create a framework for your clients to follow. And that's extremely helpful. Yes, obviously it's a sales opportunity, but it's also an opportunity for you to look at something and say, okay, I have these small businesses and aligning them to something like NIST is very difficult. Not to say NIST is a bad standard, but at the same, NIST is great, but it's extremely complex. And for a small business that doesn't necessarily need to be need to align to CMMC because they're not a government contractor, there may be another avenue that you can follow to align them to something. So having a framework like the one insurance carriers lay out is helpful because now your clients are looking at something and saying, I have a goal to achieve. I have a pathway to meet, as opposed to willy-nilly just throwing security control requirements at them saying, hey, you need to have this. Hey, you need to have this. Well, why do I need to have any of that? Well, look, insurance carriers who are consistently reviewing the claims that come through and analyzing the risk and understanding what has happened in prior claims as to why those happen, they are adapting and adding newer security measures to what they're asking for because they're seeing that people who had this part, like let's say endpoint detection and response, people who had endpoint detection and response saw fewer claims than people who didn't. People who had managed detection and response saw even fewer claims. So we're going to start asking about those things and offering premium incentives and offering eligibility requirements and all that kind of stuff to people who adhere to that level, to that standard, right? So you have the basic risk. You have the people who say, hey, you're this tall, you're able to ride this ride, you can get a policy. Then you have the optimal risk. And if you're an optimal risk, you have way more carriers open to your disposal who are willing to give you a policy at a better price and better coverage options. So that's how MSPs can be utilizing the whole thing, and say, hey, I'm not just going to give them the bare minimum, because then you're actually not doing due diligence for your client. You're actually opening them up to just more expensive policies. Whereas if you can get them optimized, now there's a lot more opportunity for them in terms of pricing and accessibility.
And you probably either are heading in this direction or talk about it regularly. But as an MSP, the reason that doing that is exciting is because that's upsell. Although those
Upsell.
extra things, if you build your business properly, which looks at what are my offerings, what are the value I'm charging for the offerings, how much does it cost for me to deliver my offerings, if you really lean into that, then you can understand, well, I'm thrilled to be able to offer these other things because there's margin here, or when I do this, I get X, Y, and Z, or when I engage with these types of customers, it's really easy on my team, or it creates these extra workflows. There's all these different things that an MSP can utilize this for, to either
Yep.
drive more revenue or create a differentiator potentially from a marketing perspective.
Just drive more revenue, differentiator for new business. You can now outline, hey, here are the requirements we have for all new onboards, and here's why it aligns with baseline insurance requirements. Like, there's a whole thing you can do to help educate your clients on why you're doing it, and it does provide extra income for your business. And then my last piece of advice for MSPs is the same piece of advice I gave to the client. And this is a little different reasoning, is that MSPs are often part of networking groups, right? Like when I was a financial advisor, I was part of a tips networking group where we met at a diner once a month and we exchanged tips and we talked about wins and losses and all that kind of stuff. A lot of MSPs are part of those networking groups, and there's always an insurance agent in those networking groups. And so the MSP and the insurance agent align, and they say, hey, we're We're going to pass leads back and forth. The insurance agent knows that they're not going to be able to sell good cyber insurance unless the client has good security in place, and the MSP knows that the MSP knows that any good cyber strategy involves having a cyber insurance policy, but the MSP can't solicit it because they're not licensed. So those two can work in tandem. The problem is we still run into the roadblock that there are a lot of agents who don't do cyber well. So you may have this agent in your networking group, but then if you're not doing the due diligence as an MSP to make sure that they know cyber insurance, then you could potentially be setting your clients up for something bad. Right. And so align, just as your client should align themselves with a good cyber insurance agent, you as an MSP should align yourself with a good cyber insurance partner who, if you're going to refer business back and forth, you need to know that they're going to equip your client with a policy that fits their risk. The beauty of Fifth Wall, selfish plug, beauty of Fifth Wall is, yes, we work direct with MSPs, awesome, but we also work with your agents. So if you have an agent who you're really tight with and you're like, you know what, I don't know if they know cyber great, dude, we'll come in, we'll help them, we'll work with them, and they'll get the same commission they always get. Doesn't really matter. And we're going to set them up to provide good policies to your client. So that revenue stream for you as an MSP stays open. And you're now given the additional assurance that your clients are getting the right policy to fit their risk. And that's really important if you're going to step up from cybersecurity sales to cybersecurity advisor.
Thank you for that. How can an SMB tell somebody that's just shucking cybersecurity and somebody that's an advisor? How can they tell the difference?
I think it does go back to, there's a couple of layers, right? I mean, we could really, shucking is a good word because you shuck corn and that has a lot of layers too. Anyway, so there's a couple of things that come to mind. First, is this person, the cybersecurity professional, just coming in and trying to sell you stuff all the time? Like, is every conversation you're having with them just, hey, I'm trying to sell you something? Or are they checking in with you on a quarterly basis just to kind of review where things are at, let you know down the road, like, hey, you know what? You have a couple of devices here that are going to be approaching end of life in the next 2 years. Just want to make you aware of that. We're going to have a conversation down the road about that, setting you up for that. Like, are they advising your business from a cybersecurity standpoint, or are they just coming in to sell you something? That doesn't mean that the MSP is necessarily bad. I think it just means that the conversations with clients are not aligned properly. Like, if the only time you're connecting with your MSP is because they're trying to sell you some new security, like, that doesn't sound like a relationship I want to be a part of. So I mean, that's a motivating factor to the MSP, because if you're just having sales conversations with your client and that's the only time you're ever meeting with them, there's another MSP probably down the road who is doing it differently. So you just need to recognize, like, that's going to set you apart. You're coming in and advising, you're giving them a roadmap as to what security is, educating them on good security. You're defining practices. You're coming in, you're saying, hey, let's make sure you have a good incident response plan in place so that when an event happens, you know what to do. You can stay calm. We can get insurance involved. We can do all those things, right? Hey, you really should have a good insurance policy. I'm going to connect you with some people who are going to make sure that happens, even though I do not financially benefit from that, right? As an MSP, you can't take insurance earnings because you're not licensed. So you legally cannot accept insurance dollars, but it's still really important that your clients have an insurance policy. And you know that, like, that's the advisor level. You are doing things to secure your client and help your client withstand the blast of a cyber incident, even if it doesn't have a financial gain for your business. Like, that's taking it to the next level. So that's where I would say that's what I would look for as a client, is how's my MSP interacting with me? Yeah, that's probably a good one.
Thank you for that. What does the insurance world and the cyber insurance world think about artificial intelligence?
Oh man, we could go on with this one. This is pretty fun. And I wanted to talk about this just because AI is a little bit of a buzzword right now. And there's all the stuff right now with DeepSeek and everyone freaking out about it. And I'm not going to give my opinion on DeepSeek because I think it's just whatever. But what I will say, there's kind of two pieces here. So carriers are starting to define artificial intelligence. So, like, they're starting to draft language as to how they define AI. And the reason I say how they define is, on any insurance policy, you have a section called definitions, where they lay out, they literally define all the language and all the parts of a policy. And They lay it out, and you can read it and say, okay, well, when they say invoice manipulation, this is what it means. When they say cyber event, this is what it means. When they say artificial intelligence, this is what it means. Now, I don't know if that's on any policies yet, but I know they're starting to draft those definitions, right? And the reason that's important is once a definition starts to be drafted, it's usually going to mean that there's something AI related on the policy. And what we're kind of leaning towards right now, and again, this is all speculation, but it's fun to talk about because artificial intelligence is the buzz right now. It's all the fancy stuff. So what I think is going to happen is it's going to be less saying, hey, we're going to add another coverage item for artificial intelligence. And what they may actually do is add exclusions, like saying, hey, if you accidentally slander a company because you used artificial intelligence to create marketing and it said something wrong about a company, we're not covering your media liability for that. Like, we'll cover it if if it's just an honest mistake and, you have an intern draft something and they say something wrong and someone gets mad and sues you for it. But if you're using AI and we can trace it back and look at your chat history, your chat GPT history, and see that that's where you pulled it from, you just copied and pasted what they said, didn't do any sort of diligence to proofread or anything like that. Or I mean, we can literally copy and paste the text from that post, plug it into one of those AI readers, and it'll determine if it was AI generated in the first place. So it's like this kind of additional layer of saying, hey, there may be exclusions involved. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is if you're a business owner and you're listening to this, if you're not utilizing AI, you're probably going to fall behind. I hate to say it. It's just the way of the world right now. You have to utilize AI on some level, but you have to do it well. AI is not something you don't go on to ChatGPT, type in a prompt, and then copy and paste it and use that as responses for things. You gotta look at what's being said. You gotta proof it. You gotta edit it. You gotta make it sound like you're going back to being genuine. You gotta make it sound like it's in your voice. I mean, yeah, you can use it for brainstorming. It's an extremely helpful tool. But if you're just copy and pasting those response, first of all, people are going to know. I mean, when I'm on LinkedIn and people comment on my posts, it's clearly an AI response. I'm like, dude, I'm not even engaging in this. Like, that's just clearly AI.
Which is such a bummer thing, because it's like,
I know.
you didn't even read it. You didn't even read my post. Like,
you probably copied my post, plugged it into ChatGPT, said create a response for this, and then copied that as the comment. Like, it's just I don't know, man. It's frustrating. But as a business owner, then you're setting yourself up for two things: potentially publishing something that's false and you could get in trouble for it, and insurance might not cover it, and you're posing the risk of being seen as not genuine because you're letting artificial intelligence do your marketing for you. And those are both issues in my mind. The other component, real quick, with AI and insurance carriers is there's a lot out there too with insurance carriers utilizing AI themselves to determine better risks. And I think that's actually a really fascinating approach, right? They're saying, hey, rather than us just pour over all this statistical data and see what happens, plug it into an AI engine and see what happens. And it's like, oh man, their AI learning model is scanning through a year's worth of claims and determining that if these security controls were in place, you would see X% less of this. And what that's leading to, and what a lot of MSPs are not so happy about, is carriers turning around and saying, we're going to create our own cybersecurity divisions and sell these controls ourselves, because if our clients have them and we offer discounted premiums on them, then we're going to see less payout on claims, and we want that, right?
And so they also want to sell more policies.
Bingo. And so if you go back to the MSP, what's one word of advice to them is, you want to be that cybersecurity advisor. You want your client to think anytime a cybersecurity control is solicited to them, even if the insurance agent is saying, hey, you can add this security control, it's going to bring your premium down, the first thing they should do is think of you as their MSP and say, I'm going to go talk to them first, because I need to see what that's all about, right? That's how you know you're a good cybersecurity advisor. You're not just a salesperson. Those are kind of the two big things with AI. I guess the last one is, if you're a business, right, and you house a lot of sensitive data, and this is where you need to be careful with AI, because a lot of these are public facing learning models, right? It's like a lot of these small businesses are not going to build an in-house only AI engine and say, I'm going to teach it myself and I'm going to train it myself, and it's going to only be focused around my business and nothing else. No, most of these are reaching out to other things. So when you feed that information, then it can also pull that information for responses to other people, and you're training the model. And the only thing you want to be careful about there is that you're not uploading sensitive client data and information into something like that. Because again, if insurance carriers decide they're going to create exclusions and there's a data leak that they trace back to you uploading, I know it sounds, this is like scare tactic kind of stuff, but it's really just good business sense. Like, if it's sensitive data, don't share it with anything, not even an AI bot, just to get a response.
That's good feedback.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your expertise with us. Can you tell people, I know we're running up on the end of the hour here. I want to be thoughtful and cognizant of your time. I do have one more question if I could try to slip it in.
Go for it, man.
With all of the risks and all of the regulations, how can an entrepreneur determine what to be listening to and what is just noise? On either side of things, whether you're an MSP or a small business or in the startup space, because
Yeah,
there's so much from.
there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. My first thing, man, is like, if anyone's quoting anything, anyone claims to say, "Oh, well, stats are saying this," or recent trends are showing this, and they're not posting any sources for it, I wouldn't trust that person. I've called people out on LinkedIn before when I'm like, "Source, bro, like, where's it at?" And they send me they send me in a private message some graph from like 3 years ago, and I'm like, "This is outdated information. Also, why don't you share this in your post?" Um, so it's, that kind of thing. Again, if people are going to share information, they should also share where they're getting that information from. That said, I would gravitate towards people who are willing to share information plus the sources, right? And if you're an entrepreneur and you're building a business, right? To just have someone say, "Well, you need this much insurance, or you need these security controls to just because," right? But without showing any real quantifiable metrics around that, I don't think it's helpful. Whereas if you're able to say to the business owner, "Well, you know what? You've started a business that is you've started a manufacturing company. Right now, your revenue is only really here. So, but if it were to grow to this point, this is how much you could risk losing in the event of a cyber attack based on historical data. Here's where we pulled the data from." Like, we need to be able to have those conversations. It can't just be all this ethereal, "Oh, I heard this once on a podcast, so I'm going to repeat that information," because who knows if that's real. Like, pull in data that you've been able to vet, that you've been able to find, and as an entrepreneur, those are the people you want to seek out, because there is so much stinking information out there. Like, find the people who can back up their claims and who can actually give you quantifiable data that's going to say, "Here's what your business risks losing. Here's how getting these security controls and this type of policy helps mitigate that."
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you,
dude.
Will. Tell
Zach, this
people
was
how
fun.
this was fun. Tell people how
Yeah.
they can engage with Fifth Wall, and let me put your name and stuff back up there.
Yeah.
Wow.
You can go to two things. I post a lot of memes, and they're all goofy yet thought provoking on LinkedIn. So you can go to LinkedIn/in/Wilbo, but the L is a
Oh,
1.
Will.
It's
Oh,
really confusing, man. Just search Will Brooks on LinkedIn and look for a guy that looks like me. You can look up Will Brooks Fifth Wall Solutions. And then the other thing is, go to fifthwallsolutions.com. If you're an MSP, go to fifthwallsolutions.com/MSP. If you're a business owner, just go to fifthwallsolutions.com. We can help you out with all sorts of things, cyber insurance question related. And MSPs, we have a whole partnership program. If you're an agent listening in, we have a whole partnership program. We work with both. We'd love to have conversations with you and help get the cyber insurance stuff smoothed out for you and your clients.
awesome. Will, thanks again for being here. Next
Zach,
week,
this was good. Appreciate you.
I appreciate you, man. Next week, we are having I'm going to blank on her last name. Julia from Tech Finance CEO is going to come on and talk about things that an organization looking to get financing for the very first time would want to have ready to go so they can win in that experience. And also, if you haven't checked it out already, we launched an events page on triunitystrategies.com for all of the different ways we're communicating good information, whether it be workshops, Twitch streams, or these podcasts. So check that out if you haven't seen it before. Will, thank you again. And man, you should take those AirPods out, because I'm pretty sure this this closing music is going to be too freaking loud.
I'll just turn
Because
my
it was,
volume down right now.
yeah, do it. Get it. Protect yourself, and anybody else, protect yourself, because I can't make it quieter until it goes, and I biffed it. So thank you, everybody. Happy Friday. Have a good one. Whoop.